Yeah. But I found that in other universities too, like Ann Arbor, for example, they also have that issue.
Yeah, we're in pretty good shape. Thank you.
Wow. Centralized. That is awesome.
American universities don't participate.
Yep.
How did that go? Was there somebody out there doing a?
Someone was using one of the machines, but I put a sign on the door, so hopefully it will be quiet.
So that was just a printer. Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know how I got upside down. Right, the hanging is something, although it actually makes for great. I think I got
Well, I figure everyone's going to be looking down. Actually, it's actually
after the fact rationalization. Here we go again. Let's see, start from times.
Are we going to just dive straight into it? This is here. So, at this point, we just gotta go. You know what I mean? I'm not looking at this.
Okay, good morning. Thank you all for coming to our session on artificial intelligence and the future of legal education. My name is Harold O'Grady. I'm a reference librarian at Brooklyn Law School. And before I introduce the other members of the panel who are in the room and the one who was virtually attending, we just want to draw your attention to this Prezi and this rather ominous quote by Stephen Hawking about the potential end of the human race. And now that's kind of a little bit ominous, and we don't necessarily, maybe we're going to queue up to the other thing. It has some implications for legal education. We're not focusing on the end of the human race. We're focusing on the end of lawyers, maybe. I think you folks have been here before in other conferences. You've heard Richard Susskind at AALL in Boston a few years back with his book, The End of Lawyers, and he's got some other books on that. So what is the implication of artificial intelligence on legal education? And just like the internet before it, we're really at a moment where there's a big sea change in the total economic and social landscape of legal research and practice. So I thought we'd want to start out with this interview by John Oliver of Stephen Hawking. Some of you may have seen this before, but let's go to the videotape, as they say.
Let's talk about artificial intelligence. In a recent op-ed column, you said, and I quote, "Success in creating artificial intelligence would be the biggest event in human history. Unfortunately, it might also be the last." Are you saying that robots are going to destroy humanity? And is that a scientific argument or the pitch for an amazing movie?
Artificial intelligence could be a real danger in the not-too-distant future. It could design improvements to itself and outsmart us all.
I know you're trying to get people to be cautious there, but why should I not be excited about fighting a robot?
You would lose.
Well, okay, to start, we don't know that, do we? We don't know that for sure, because what could a robot do that I couldn't then fight back with by simply just unplugging him, right?
There's a story that scientists built an intelligent computer. The first question they asked it was, "Is there a God?" The computer replied, "There is now," and a bolt of lightning struck the plug, so it couldn't be turned off.
Holy shit, that's the most terrifying story I've ever heard.
Yes.
Hold on. Who is talking to me right now? Is it you, or is it a sentient computer pretending to talk on your behalf?
It's me.
Yeah, but how do I know that, Professor? Because if computers had become sentient, what better way to convince people they hadn't than by co-opting the voice of the most intelligent man on the planet?
You're an idiot.
Yeah, but who's saying that, Stephen? You or the machine?
Both of us.
Okay, all right. I mean, that's actually quite reassuring. You've stated that you believe that...
So I'm Lloyd Carew-Reed. I'm a tech educator at Brooklyn Law School. And Harold and I had this idea that the more we start doing things with tech ed, and we find that things are changing just rapidly. Even just doing a simple Google search, your results, just of the actual typing, as you type, you're finding the terms that are coming up are the ones you're about to think of. So it seems to be happening all the time. And at the same time, where there's a tremendous amount of confusion about what AI really is. So I'd like to introduce...
Well, maybe before you do that, Lloyd, maybe we could just ask the audience, what do you think about Hawking's voice? Is that artificial intelligence? Is that a robot? Can maybe we can get a show of hands? Who thinks it's artificial intelligence or a robot? Anybody? Who thinks it is not? So, why do you think it's not? Okay. I didn't see anybody who thought, yeah?
I mean, it's driven by the user.
Okay.
It's not coming in with something.
So I guess the reason for the question is there may be some, I mean, as we were exploring this, we have some uncertainty about the definition of artificial intelligence. And that's why we kind of wanted to get a sense of what you all think about that. Does anyone think that it approaches, is it a robot? Nobody, yeah. What do you think?
Well, that's a good point and a good question, and I think it brings us to the introduction of our AI specialists who are in the room here. We've been very fortunate in being able to capture them because they happen to actually come from Georgia Tech, which is literally 10 minutes away. We have here Dr. Mark Riedl, and we have Mikhail Jacob, who is a Ph.D. student in AI. Both of them are experts in the field of AI.
And also, before we hear from them, we have virtually attending Professor Heidi Brown, who is our Director of Legal Writing at Brooklyn Law School, attending here virtually. But I guess you want to turn it over to Mark, yeah?
That's right. I wanted to say that Professor Heidi Brown will be talking about the human side of legal education. So let's bring this over to Mark. And Mark, would you like to help us try to figure out what this AI stuff is all about?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Mark Riedl. I'm an associate professor of computer science and artificial intelligence just up the street at Georgia Tech. So and it's a pleasure to be here because I understand that there's nowadays a lot of hype in the news and the press about artificial intelligence. There's startup companies making billions of dollars, software packages being rolled out, being sold to you guys and hyped and all those sorts of things. And what I find is if we really want to understand what the current state of artificial intelligence is, we don't talk to physicists or philosophers, but let's go straight to the source and talk to people who actually spend their lives building artificial intelligence systems, because I think what you'll find is I have a much more grounded idea of what is actually possible. So my answer to is Stephen Hawking's voice system artificial intelligence is yes. It's actually predicting the next words, because he's trying to speak very fast, but he can only move his eyes. And so the better the system can queue up different possible words that he might actually want to say, and the better it can make that prediction, the faster he can speak and the more interactive he can be with us. So that predictive thing is artificial intelligence. It is, as one of you said, it is actually modeling the English language and likely terms. It's learning from Stephen Hawking words he likes to say. He probably likes to say physics words more than the average person out there who might be using the exact same piece of software.
So the software is written so that it is progressive.
It is, yes, because it might give it's a software called SwiftKey, but basically what it does is it gives you, here's 10 different words or something like that you might want to say based on, if you say my name is, right, there's a certain things that make sense and doesn't. And then of those things it says, well, which one, Stephen Hawking tends to pick the same word over and over again, it learns to queue that one up as more likely. So that being said, what is artificial intelligence? There's actually a big debate in artificial intelligence research about what is artificial intelligence. You see a lot of that coming out of the news. People disagree about what it is. My definition, the one I use, the one that most people agree with, is actually really, really bad. It is artificial intelligence is, I've blanked on this completely, which is awesome. It's the act of performing behaviors that any reasonable person would think requires intelligence. So you can immediately see the circular nature of this. So now what is intelligence, right? And we don't have a good definition for that. So, but if you take the terms of anything that looks like it might reasonably require intelligence, you might basically say, if a human does it, or a human could do it, but a computer is doing it instead, you might call that intelligence. Now that can be anything from driving a car, which humans do. If a computer drives a car, is that intelligence? Yes, very limited form of intelligence. It can drive a car, it can't do much else. Predicting the words you want to say, we speak words. Computer can predict words, maybe that's intelligence as well. Anticipating what pizza you're going to order on a nightly basis, right? Could be considered intelligence. Google, when it tries to suggest the web pages to you, what it's trying to do is it's trying to figure out what things you want to actually see based on your search query. That's artificial intelligence as well. Optical character recognition. Have you ever used a printer and it scans your handwriting and puts up words? Is artificial intelligence, because we can read, and now a computer can read. The interesting thing about artificial intelligence is that when it becomes successful, we tend to forget it was originally artificial intelligence in the first place. Your GPS runs artificial intelligence every time you try to ask for directions. But now it's in a little box this big, so it can't possibly be artificial intelligence. So our successes tend to not be artificial intelligence, which is why people get concerned, because when we work on things, we're now working on the next biggest sort of problem, and it seems somewhat impossible, and then suddenly someone solves it, rolls out an application, and suddenly it's not artificial intelligence anymore. But going to this question of what is, so please ask questions or interject if you wish. I'm basically giving you my intro course introduction, the first day of class to my AI class. Yeah.
The predictive nature of things that you what point is there
Right.
I'm the one who decided.
Right. Yeah.
So the question is, can it actually, I always think of a Turing test, it
Right.
respond creatively.
Yeah. Yeah.
So where does that line draw?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. So the definition I give you is very broad. It can include everything from autocorrect to something that could try to pass the Turing test that passes it off as human. And part of the issue with that is when artificial intelligence as a field first started, it started out with some very lofty ambitions. This notion that theoretically there's nothing a computing device in silicon can do that a human can't do, and vice versa. And so the early work in artificial intelligence was about passing the Turing test. It was about, well, humans can speak, they can make jokes, they can tell stories, they can draw pictures, and I don't see a reason, and there's no theory out there, there's no proof that says a computer can't do any of that. Turned out to be much, much harder than we thought. In the last few years, so you might call that broad or general intelligence. And I think most people have this notion that when we talk about artificial intelligence, we mean things we see in iRobot or Ex Machina or the Terminator, right? This broad notion that it can do everything that a human could do and maybe a little bit better, which is kind of the scary part, right? But in the last 40 years, what we've figured out in artificial intelligence is that we're really, really good at doing what's called narrow intelligence, which is a well-specified problem like predicting the next word or driving a car and not hitting pedestrians. And once we have this well-defined problem, a goal, we're giving the computer the goal, we can build algorithms that are super specialized to doing that really well. So people use the term super intelligence, right? A self-driving car nowadays is super intelligent. It can probably drive better than you can, in the sense that it will make fewer errors, right? But it can't do anything else. And more importantly, it doesn't want to do anything else. It's like this OCD algorithm says, must drive car, must drive as good as possible, must drive as good as possible. I don't care about anything else. Not gonna write poetry, not gonna contemplate the destruction of humanity, right? Must drive the car, oh, there's something in front of me, avoid it, right? That's all it's thinking about, and that's all it's capable of thinking about.
So Mark, if I may, if just to kind of bring this back to the focus of
Right.
computer-assisted legal instruction, most of our legal databases, Westlaw, Lexis, and other legal research databases are answering such questions as, what is the lead case on cruel and unusual punishment?
Right.
The response that we get from a legal research database is, in effect, artificial intelligence.
Right.
Is that accurate?
It is, right? Again, using this really kind of broad notion, but also that's a very, very narrowly defined term. Find a document that meets the following criteria using these keywords and matching. And, there's a lot involved in, making sure the keywords actually make sense and it's not getting tricked by certain words. To get back to your point, the best artificial intelligence we have out there gets their goals from humans. They don't decide where to drive. They don't decide what to look for in these legal databases. They need our initialization, our criteria to do that. And then once it has it, it takes it off and runs. So the best AI, and I think the future of AI, at least in the next 5 to 10 years, is AI as tools. There are things that are going to solve problems that are very narrowly defined, that are hard for humans to do or time consuming. Not that humans can't do them, but it takes a lot of time. And they're going to be designed to assist, to take your desires, your goals, and to act on them to try to help you meet your goals sooner. So I don't see personally a lot of people who are interested in strictly replacing. Now, to get into the jobs things, there are some jobs that are more automatable, right? That there's less, if your job is to do someone else's goal, right, you may be automatable, right? But not necessarily, because you also have to ask the question of trustworthiness. If you offload search to a computer, how do you know you're not missing documents? How do you know you haven't been able to, like a human can take an intention and expand upon it. You asked me to get this, but this made me think of this other thing, and I brought you these other things as well, and I found some other things. Those are the ill-formed parts of the workload that, that frankly AI researchers are working on, but we're much, much further away from being.
Mark, we have just one final question over in the corner here, and then we should move on to the next segment.
I talk a lot, I'm sorry. So
We've already, IBM already automated legal research.
sure. Aspects of it, right? So I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what you do when you do legal research and case preparation, sorts of things. But I think it is not going to be the entire answer to the question. The human will still have to be in the loop to decide what to look for and use that.
But they feed into Ross and then Ross.
Right. Ross is, my understanding, is basically fancy search, right? Not much more complicated than what Google already does, but on more specialized data.
No, Ross is the
Right.
first year.
Right.
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 Specific artificial intelligence. for
Right.
legal research.
So I don't know Ross specifically. I do know what IBM Watson did that won the Jeopardy. And what it does is it is basically fancy keyword matching. Right? So it still has to know what those keywords
So
are.
they took Ross and specialized in it and monitors every case you do,
Right.
case and everything.
Sure.
The daytime to
Sure.
all the first year legal research.
Right.
And they're already trying to walk it.
Right.
You go to Ross Intelligence.
We're going to have to move on. It's a great
think we're gonna
question,
come back to this, right?
but
But
we'll come back to that.
that actually is a really great question at this point, because why did we decide to present this session? Because of its implications for legal research. So maybe there are obviously from the opening session some real anxiety and fears about the potential annihilation of the human race and the elimination of all lawyers, etc. But realistically speaking, there are some impacts on jobs. Ross Intelligence is one of these databases that may or may not impact the hiring of first-year law students because they're being replaced by robots. And there, aside from the jobs issues, there's some of the ethical concerns about whether Ross may be engaging in the unauthorized practice of law, shall we say? And how do we balance the tech issues with the human issues, which Professor Brown will speak about towards the end of the session. So I think what we really wanted to do is drill down to some real specific issues where artificial intelligence will benefit law firms and practitioners, and then other areas, other lawyer tasks where it's probably not so. Some of these tasks are really not so amenable to automation. So I think that one of the things that I hope that you've had a chance to look at as part of our presentation, we posted some papers that Mikhail here and Mark wrote, as well as Professor Brown. But there were some really interesting other articles that are out there in the pipeline. There's the Remus and Levy article, which hasn't been published yet, but it's just on SSRN, about can robots be lawyers? And that's kind of the question. And then there's a wonderful book out there by Ryan Kalo from the University of Washington on robot law and about what Mark was talking about earlier. We're talking about self-driving cars. What are the liability issues that relate to that? What if there's an accident involving is the law keeping up with technology? So I think your question is really a very valid point and kind of gets us down to some real specifics about the kinds of tasks that law students will engage in their legal career, and you all will help them become good researchers and good writers. And then finally, practitioners will be engaging in. So maybe we could move on to the, unless you want to, I think these the 6 lawyer tasks, and I picked these up. I didn't originate them. They come from the Remus and Levy article, Can Robots Be Lawyers? And I think that if we think about, she really put more thought into it than I did, but it's basically case management and project management where automation may have some real impact on how you manage these huge cases. Document preparation and document review. I think that Professor Brown will want to speak to those issues down the road. What makes for good legal writing? That kind of thing. The legal research component, I think Professor Brown will also want to speak to that. And then we look at some of these other things about legal analysis. You can pull up a series of search results. It doesn't mean a whole lot unless you can analyze it and analogize it to situations that aren't all 4 squares with your particular research task. And then I think finally the 2 end ones, which maybe at this stage of the game automation has no role, is client communication. And finally, court appearances. I don't think robots will be appearing in your local courtroom arguing your traffic ticket.
That's debatable.
Well, that's debatable too. I mean, there actually is a young fellow who's in Britain who's come up with an appeals process that's all automated. Because, I mean, there are some tasks that many lawyers just simply don't want to engage in, traffic tickets being one of them. They're not very high income producing, and maybe that's more susceptible to. So I think maybe Lloyd and I wanted to have a little back and forth about that. And we can't cover all of these points, and we certainly urge you to chime in. But I think the ones that we just wanted to zero in on this is the first one, the case management issue. So, Lloyd, I'll turn it over to you about some of these structured. I think the article that Remus and Levy talked about looked at the kinds of tasks, whether or not they are structured tasks or whether they are unstructured tasks that require human mediation. So, Lloyd, you want to talk about the...
Yeah, so as Harold was saying in the article, and we really have taken a lot from this article because it is so well analyzed and it talks about these various distinctions between lawyering tasks and whether or not they're sort of really needing that human element, or are they completely programmable by some sort of artificial intelligence setup. So clearly billing is something that would have a large component of being automated. Timekeeping could clearly be automated in a very simple sort of way. Templating, setting up forms, completing forms. Harold referred to a situation. I think he was probably going to mention the WeSite startup or group that have created this small application that apparently allows you to sort of automate. In fact,
that's happening right now.
It's happening right now.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff that is very, very task specific, that doesn't really require anything more than some basic data. And once the data gets put in, it can churn out the results.
Well, maybe you could speak to the scheduling issue.
Right. The scheduling issue is an interesting one because turns out that from the same space, from Georgia Tech, we have another professor who has designed a program, a scheduling program named Jill Watson. And Jill Watson was used in the background for the professor to actually relate to the students who are trying to schedule appointments and schedule assignments and stuff like that. And it was all done, I think, through the phone. Is that right, with Jill Watson? Where they would call through and
The Jill Watson was not my work. It's a work of one of my colleagues at Georgia Tech. It was you might call it an artificial assistant for teaching assistants. So they had a very large class, 300 plus students, and they ran a bulletin board where you can ask questions of the TAs to help with your homework.
Right.
And it was based on the Watson technology, which, by the way, Watson is a really great brand. It basically just means a really, really big computer running algorithms. And the algorithms have to be rewritten for every single purpose. So the ROS probably uses some of the same code as the original Jeopardy playing Watson, but every single version of Watson that you hear about is basically a completely different program that's been having, so someone had to go and analyze the problem, write specialized software for that.
So there's a lot of human effort here
Just
going
in
on
terms of the engineering.
constantly.
It's not this one magical thing that goes and it can be a TA and it can be a lawyer and it can be a chef and it can be a...
Was there disclosure that Jill Watson
No, this-
was in fact a...
They did not disclose to the students that this was. They presented it as a fifth TA who would only answer questions on the bulletin board system. But what it did is, basically, if you've ever taught a class, you get a lot of the same questions over and over again. Slight variations of the same questions, because people don't read each other's questions and answers. And so, if a human TA answers a question in text, the Jill Watson system basically looked at the original question and the answer and tried to memorize the answer to those things. And as people asked similar questions, it became more and more confident that it had the answer in one of its databases and could take an existing answer and tweak it in small ways. So it was basically learning from the human TAs, but basically learning that there were some questions that could be easily answered by looking at the answers to old questions. And there was a set of questions that were new that the human TAs had to answer. And it would basically look at all the questions that came through and said, if I wasn't like 99% confident that I could answer this question, it gets kicked to the human TAs, and they would step in and answer the really hard questions about the homework, or the original ones.
And I understand that the students were completely fooled. They did not know that Jill Watson was not a human being, and it was only after the fact that this was actually, information was released to them, and they were kind of, wow.
So maybe this is only computer science, but in computer science classes, 90% of the questions are, when is my homework due? Where do I submit it? And something, and usually, something in the syllabus, right? So it's, these are things that are very
So
easy to automate.
even within the structured tasks, there still are some unstructured questions that require human mediation.
They're not fully structured, they're semi-structured, right? And then there are ones that are completely new, novel. The AI had no answer to, right? Could not do anything.
But they were able to fool everybody because they were able to push, the AI was smart enough to know, listen, send it to a real human.
So maybe we could look at the next a set of case management tasks that are more unstructured, things like monitoring performance or assessing party contracts. Obviously, that does require some kind of human mediation, and maybe they don't lend themselves as well to automation as these other ones. So we don't really have much time to talk about all of these other. You can read the article yourself, but I think what we wanted to do is turn it over to you, Mark, to demonstrate some actual. You had mentioned storytelling, and that's such a theme for lawyers. So maybe you can do a demonstration for the audience here.
Do you want to bring up my slides, I think, actually?
Sure.
So I do want to say one more thing about this structured versus unstructured thing. If we look at what artificial intelligence has been really good at in the last couple of years in particular, especially using these technologies called neural nets, which I will not describe to you except for they are not really emulating the human brain. What artificial intelligence has gotten really good at is something called machine learning, which is basically pattern finding. So lots and lots of data, especially if you have very large data sets, if it is semi-structured or completely structured and has repeating patterns in it, artificial intelligence is really good at picking up those patterns and then acting on those patterns. So when you look at the things where if you look at where the startups are in artificial intelligence, the medical records, there's billing issues,
Timekeeping.
healthcare, like healthcare automation is largely about billing, by the way. A lot of money there. There are patterns that happen over and over again with only very, very small variations. And it can say, this looks like this other thing that I've seen 1,000 times with this one little change. And I think I can deal with that one little change. And those are where we're having the hugest successes in artificial intelligence. This is where we see artificial intelligence flowing out of the lab into industry and commercial applications and products, and where Watson is really kind of capitalizing. Watson's a pattern matcher, a very fancy pattern matcher. So every time you see artificial intelligence in the news, swap artificial intelligence. If you 99% of the time you swap artificial intelligence with pattern matcher, probably have just fixed that article and made it more accurate.
So Mark, you have a YouTube clip of a demonstration that you want to show?
So I want to now. I'm a researcher, which means my job is to stay about 5 years ahead of industry in terms of what I think artificial intelligence can do and work on problems that are a little bit farther out. I think one of the reasons why I'm here is because my interests in artificial intelligence revolve around looking at the discrepancies between what humans are good at and what computers are now good at, and trying to bridge those gaps a little bit more. And where I've been focusing most of my work is on storytelling, because stories are these things that we do all the time, just around the dinner table, but also when we go to movies and watch TV shows, read books. There's a lot of stories. And what I've heard is that you guys also think a lot about stories, case studies.
I will say that not being an attorney and all the interactions I've had with attorneys have led me to believe that attorneys are probably the best storytellers on the planet. When I saw his article about storytelling, I thought, this guy understands the legal mind frame.
But I want to say a little bit about what artificial intelligence can do within the context of stories, because this might be coming down the line towards you guys. But this is not near-term stuff. This is really very speculative sorts of things. So can you flip forward one?
Yeah.
So there's various sort of the research that I work on is involved in story understanding, story generation, and I'm getting into some moral reasoning in terms of artificial intelligence. But very, very quickly, one of the biggest problems in artificial intelligence is story understanding. So here's a very simple story that I put up there. This story is incredibly hard for artificial intelligence to understand. How do we know a computer? First of all, do you think you can understand that story? Do you think you got a good gist of what's going on there? Right. So let me ask you some questions to test you guys. Did John eat dinner? Probably. Did John and Sally arrive together? Yes. Most people agree with you. None of that is stated in the story. But how are you so confident? Because you've gone to restaurants hundreds and hundreds of times, and you kind of know that there's something called common sense reasoning. It's the everyday experiences that we've just kind of internalized and take for granted that everyone knows. And so when I write a story like this, I know that you've been to restaurants, and I know that there's kind of a script that plays out standardly, and that there's an unusual thing going in the script. If an artificial intelligence has never been to a restaurant 100 times, it doesn't have this common sense knowledge. And this is one of the biggest problems in artificial intelligence right now is, where do we get common sense knowledge to answer even the simplest questions like that? Because if we only give this story to a computer, and we don't have a giant database of daily life experiences, it's completely lost by this simple story. And I think I wanted to put that up there because it might be shocking exactly how bad computers are at stories compared to how good humans are. My work is in story generation. This is a story that my system actually generated. Every single word up there is generated by a computer. I won't tell you how it's done, but we had to teach it common sense knowledge. This is a very simple story about a boy and a girl going on a date. Okay, but once we taught it common sense knowledge, it can tell a story. We do tests. People can't usually tell the difference between the stories that are generated by my computer and humans, which sounds amazing, But then look at the story, how simple it is, right? This is not even Michael Bay, right? It told a story about going to a restaurant or going to a movie theater, right? This is state of the art in terms of storytelling, story creation. Again, the limitation is common sense knowledge. We had to spend a long time teaching it what a date is, right? Because the computer's never been on a date. I'm gonna flip forward just very quickly here. A lot of my work, one of the biggest potentials of story generation work is in training and education. I do a lot of work in games as well, but in particular, military training is based on case studies. So go and do different sorts of scenarios under slightly different situations so that you kind of basically have to practice, and every single practice scenario is a little bit different from the past. I think this is related to how lawyers learn through case studies, maybe in the more advanced parts of the curriculum. I don't know.
Well, we have a thing called moot court, which is, a live sort of practice sort of courtroom situation. And a number of professors are bringing games into their teaching situations. Right. They have, Jeopardy-type games and so on.
Right. And then one last project I want to talk about really quickly because I don't want to spend up too much time. Actually, I want to skip over this one. It's a fun story, but go one more. These are other things I've been working on. I want to talk about what's called machine enculturation right now, which is we're entering, this is not about, so we're going to be facing situations where artificial intelligence and robots are going to take on more autonomy, right? So think about self-driving cars where it's making decisions on what roads to drive on, when to change lanes, these sorts of things. And in the future, you may even imagine situations where computers are running errands for you, going out to a pharmacy to pick up drugs, or at home helping you with healthcare sorts of situations. There's a lot of, again, going back to this sort of notion of common sense knowledge, there's a lot of knowledge out there that we have about how society works. Social conventions, social norms, social rules are things that are not really good for us on an individual basis, but by following social conventions, we avoid rubbing elbows with each other and getting into conflict. So think of the simplest thing as standing in line at a fast food restaurant. Why do we stand in line? The food is right over there. You're hungry, right? Yet we stand in line because we're trying to avoid conflict with other people. Do this kind of automatically. So one of my research efforts has been trying to teach computers social conventions so that one day when they go out into the real world and they're running around in fully embodied robots, they're not kind of pissing us off, I guess is basically, or breaking laws, right?
So this is your phrase for morality, if you would.
Right, I'm trying to avoid the word morality here because morality and ethics is a complicated thing. Social conventions is something I'm more comfortable with, yeah.
Your example is, I have experience with someone who didn't have Asperger's.
Right, yeah.
And it's parallel to the social construction to someone.
It's actually very closely. So the one way of thinking about robots and artificial intelligence right now is, since they don't understand our social conventions, think of them as having autism, right? This is kind of insensitive, I apologize. I know we're being recorded, so I'm going to be sued for sure. But think of them as, because they don't understand social conventions, they're kind of limited in the same way that someone with autism is limited. They don't fully understand the rules of society. So flip one more forward. I'm not going to go through the video because it's long, but basically one of the scenarios I've been working with is how do we teach robots and artificial intelligence how to follow these social conventions, given that they don't have all this common sense knowledge. And so we've been teaching computers how to do things like go to the pharmacy without robbing the pharmacy. And you think that this is like, you laugh, right? But if you tell a computer, bring something back to me, and there's a time penalty, right? I'm ill, bring back a drug. What does it do? It goes to the pharmacy, it sees it behind the counter, it grabs it, and it leaves. Because it doesn't understand that there is additional penalty, or another way of thinking about it is, it should be rewarded for following social conventions, which laws are based on, right? We're not talking about laws. So I've been building a system which we tell stories to computers about how people actually do things, And what we find is the difference between a robot that goes to a pharmacy and steals. By the way, the computer doesn't know about stealing. It knows pick up, put down. But what is buying? It's handing over money before taking the good, right? If it doesn't understand that small notion of exchange, which is so obvious to us, it steals, which is, in this case, a law being broken by a robot. But it turns out if you just describe what humans actually normally do, let me tell you a story about how I go to the pharmacy. And we built algorithms that can extract or reverse engineer the social conventions from these stories. Now, we discovered that when we have the computer do the exact same simulation, where it has to go to the pharmacy, it gets rewarded for trying to act like the story. So now it does things like stand in line, hands over the money before it takes the goods, without ever understanding there's a thing such as a thing called steal or not steal. It's just saying, this is what humans do, and if I do things like humans, I tend not to get in trouble.
Well, Mark,
And that's all I wanted to say there. So again, long-winded professor, sorry.
So it's amazing how time gets away from you. We do have two other panelists we want to hear from. Mikhail, maybe you could just introduce yourself, Mikhail Jacob, and tell us briefly what your work is. I don't think we have time for the demonstrations, but be able to.
Oh, well, his video's there.
Well, it's going to be too long.
You should see this video. This is cool. So
Yeah, let's do it.
We have time.
So I can quickly talk about my work. So I'm a PhD student at Georgia Tech, and the sorts of research I do is, since I'm a PhD student, I'm allowed to think about it 10 years ahead, and then I'm forced to, my advisor hits me on the head till I bring it back down to 5 years ahead. So that's what actually happens. So the work I do tends to work with computational creativity and co-creativity. Basically, the idea that you and a computer can work together to build something or do something that the two of you could not do individually without the other. Specifically, I work with improvisation. So getting a little video game character that's life-size in the real world and getting that to improvise with people. Again, more specifically, I work with dance and dance improvisation. So getting a non-human but humanoid-esque or human-esque figure to improvise dance with people by watching other people dance, dancing with them, and improving over time so that every person it dances with, it learns more about how to dance, what kind of dance moves are there, how to sequence these dance moves together, how to combine them together, etc. So
here's your video, huh?
sure,
All
I
right.
can do that, yeah. So this is basically going to see a very, very early prototype, and you have a virtual character on the left and a dancer on the right. And what you'll notice is that when she's dancing in rhythm, the computer is actually looking at her movements and trying to pick things it's seen beforehand from other people and trying to match it to her movements in such a way that it's not the same thing, but it's similar within some boundaries of quality and other criteria. So it's trying to do things that it couldn't do alone, and at the same time, the dancer is getting out of this the additional creative offer from the computer character. So it's being reminded of things that, the human is being reminded of things that the human could try in the future. The computer is learning from the human, and it's a cycle that feeds into itself to get better and better, hopefully, over time. And again, there are a lot of interesting questions that come up, especially legal questions, when this happens in terms of, so when you're creating these new things, when you're using your experiences of interacting with other people, or parts of other systems, parts of other software, videos or images from other people, when you create this new thing that's composed of other things, who gets the copyright? Who gets the intellectual property rights? There are a lot of interesting questions in that area as well.
All right, so unfortunately, we're coming to running out of time, and I didn't want to overlook the human, because the human is very important, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to bring in Professor Brown. So you've been following along here, Professor Brown, so you have some comments about how technology can aid humans or vice versa, and I'll just let you pick it up from here.
Sure. Thank you for having me. So to give you a little context of my background, I was a construction litigator for a long time. So working on cases that were very document intensive, millions of pages of paper, and cases that would take 3 years to go to trial. And now I am a law professor, and I teach the really important but also artful and creative tasks of legal research and writing. So that's kind of my background. I rely on technology immensely to do my job, but I will admit I'm kind of a late adopter with technology. I'm never the early adopter. I still have a landline in my apartment, but I do need technology for my job. When I read the articles about major law firms engaging a robot to do the job of a law firm associate, I almost had a panic attack, because the job of the young associate is so important in the role of client representation. And in today's global climate and the changing landscape of legal education and our legal system, there's a great call for actually increasing the humanity of what we do instead of automating or dehumanizing it. And that really comes down to, because law and conflict in the law is about people, and there's a lot of emotion involved. So, and also a lot of times there are non-legal solutions to legal problems. So the thought of sort of using logic and patterns and predicting legal outcomes to make decisions, kind of, I fear that we lose sight of the fact that we don't want to make false assumptions based on past patterns. We don't want to stereotype people based on past patterns. And instead, we need to really think about the human aspect of lawyering, because that's the way to resolve conflict. It's also the way to collaborate. So even in transactional scenarios in the law, that can be about positive emotion. So if we kind of remove a little bit of the humanity or emotional side of legal issues, we might not get the solutions that will really help society or help even individuals when they're working things out. From a practical standpoint, I wanted to just touch on sort of 3 or 4 of the legal tasks that might sound like they could be automated. But for me, I was a litigator for 15 straight years and then a law professor for 8. And having done these tasks over and over again, I truly believe that we can't just outsource them to a machine entirely. Now, I'll take document production first of all. Now, when lawyers review documents, they're looking for documents that are either responsive to the other side's request for documents, but we also look for attorney-client privilege documents and work product documents that we have a legal right to withhold from a production. And while I can see how a computer might be helpful and a good tool in that initial sorting of documents, making tough, nuanced, kind of difficult decisions on what's attorney-client privileged and what's work product, it really does take deep thought and understanding the dynamics of the legal relationship among the parties. And that's not something that I think I would feel comfortable completely relying upon a robot to do. And it would make me nervous that, okay, what if something got missed? So I was thinking about, with the iPhone, auto-correcting our texts and Google producing 10,000 results that might not actually be right, or even our GPS kind of sending us down the path. Those are kind of low-stakes mistakes. But if a robot were to miss an attorney-client privilege document, who would be responsible for that? And there's no standard of care out there yet for what attorney negligence or attorney malpractice would be in that scenario. So that just makes me concerned in the document review. Same thing with legal research. Legal research is such a critically important tool for lawyers, and it feeds right into the writing process. And while I could not do my job without the legal research databases that exist, I will admit in the olden days, I did have to sift through books to look for cases, whether they're still good law or not, shepherdizing. And now we have Shepherds and KeyCite and BCite, which really have saved thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of time. But an automated way of researching doesn't really get to the true art of legal research and having to make tough decisions on what is the right case for me to talk about in a brief. Yes, we might have 20 cases that give us the answer, but I can't write about 20 cases when I present something to the judge. So we have to make decisions that are based on experience, based on understanding the emotional dynamic. How much is the client willing to pay for my analysis? Do we have a budget? is this judge interested in reading a long-winded brief, or does he or she want 5 pages? So these are all decisions that are based on flexibility and getting to know the people involved, not just my client, but the person sitting across the table in a negotiation, in the courtroom, the jurors, the judge's clerks reading documents. So there's a lot more humanity that goes on in generating research results and also legal writing. And on the screen earlier, we had noticed about timekeeping, and it just sparked something in my mind that made me remember that while timekeeping for lawyers might also sound like an automated task, it's really not, because there's so many different human dynamics that go into even keeping your time. Yes, we have to account for, in my firm, it was every 6 minutes of your time. So it might sound like, oh, we can say for 8 hours that day I worked on a brief. But the client does not want to see, 8 hours for a brief. The client doesn't sometimes know, what does that mean? That seems like a long time for one task. So even in timekeeping, we have to be mindful of, okay, I have to explain, I spent 2.1 hours reading cases. I spent 1.6 hours outlining the brief. Then I had a meeting with the team, but certain clients don't want to pay for meeting time. Then also in timekeeping, you have to think, how is my timesheet going to be used down the road? Because if we win the case, we might be entitled to attorney's fees, and then we have to show the judge our timesheets. And so sometimes you don't even want to reveal your entire attorney-client privilege strategy, even in your timesheet, because you're thinking 3 years down the road of recovering those fees without disclosing to the other side the strategy you had all along. So even with timekeeping, well, it seems like it could be automated. There's still so many layers and nuances to the task that the lawyer is doing, even when accounting for the minutes in the day. The only other thing I wanted to kind of touch on is with client interface and juror interface. We have, if we create a machine that's going to do that, I worry that we're overlooking many issues related to gender and race issues and diversity issues. It even occurred to me with the name of the TA, it's such an all-American name. Is that what we should be choosing to interface with a very diverse group of law students or college students? Our clients are very diverse, have many different life experiences, and what we shouldn't really be automating the legal representation without thinking about all these different backgrounds and experiences that people bring to the table and might not feel comfortable or trust an entity that doesn't represent them and their backgrounds.
Well,
So-
Jill, before we start Heidi, Jill, I just wanted to Jill. Heidi, before we
was a
turn it
confession.
over for question and answers, I just wanted to ask you something about the predictive nature, of what automation does. There is a program out there now that actually predicts what Supreme Court decisions will be, so that we really don't even need a 5-4 court anymore, because it's all predictive. But you and I had spoken about this, and maybe you can speak to that about development of new case law.
I didn't hear that last part, I'm
So
sorry.
You could address the issue of whether law is just simply the application of what we've done previously, stare decisis, or whether there is a path for development of new case law.
Oh, absolutely, and that's the most exciting thing about my job is helping students realize that the law is ever changing, and every case is different. Cases might on their face seem similar, but every fact that you analyze and gather and listen, and that's another human aspect of fact gathering, is really listening to the backstory of what our clients are telling us, because a lot of times subtle facts can make all the difference in creating new law. We have statutes, we have regulations, we have case law, we have precedent, but that's the legal writer's job, the legal researcher and the legal writer's job to say, wait a minute, yes, I could predict an outcome if I do it the same way it's been done over and over again, but isn't there a nugget of a new idea here that we can get before this decision maker and carve out a new law? And it's the most exciting thing you can do as a lawyer to say, wait a minute, no, this is slightly different. This is subtly different, but in a impactful, legally significant way. And that's how we use legal writing as a tool to accomplish that. Not only at the Supreme Court level, honestly. When I teach, I really try and use trial level briefs as examples, because that's what my students and the junior associates I was mentoring before are really doing. That's where you get your hands dirty and you're making law happen at the trial court level too, by being smart and emotionally intelligent and legally intelligent and using all of these skills. So yes, I think the law is constantly developing. It needs to, because of the development in humanity.
Okay, so I think that we have a final slide here which gives you an opportunity. We don't mean to imply that we are the judge and you are the robots, but we hope that you might have some questions, either for Heidi or for Mark, or for Jacob, or for either one of us. So this is your moment to ask anything. Yes, sir.
So, very interesting panel. Thank you very much for organizing it. By hearing from industry, corporate, the Ross sort of view, lots of brand. Also hearing from the opposite end of the spectrum. Lawyers do all these things. They're not susceptible to automation. Everything's unique. And it feels on both sides maybe there's more speculation than we need to have. This? Could we do some head-to-head, comparisons to figure out really where are we in terms of? I wonder if, particularly in the audience, if there's anybody, any law schools that are working on that. All right, lawyers have done these things for us. Have algorithms that claim to be.
So just to repeat the question so that the mic picks it up, you're asking whether or not there's any studies out there that make some comparisons between these two extremes of the automated input and the human input, and whether law schools.
Legal research, there's an issue we want to know about, give it to Ross and give it to a bunch of law students or lawyers and see what happens.
So it looks like there's an answer in the back.
Preparation software versus the people.
Which school was that?
That was the legal services tech. Study where they went and audited 2,000 cases, something like that, all in the same county. Eligible under a grant at the time. I looked at the time frames to see.
What?
It was in Michigan. But that's the only one that I know about, and I don't really follow it. But I would think if people get other proceedings, they are trying. Ways to solve it. I'll see
Can I just say that in my readings over the last few weeks in preparing for this, I came across several, Ross-type programs. There is the eBrevia, which is specifically focused on contractual law and doing data mining on contracts. And there is Riedl, which has an interesting side approach. They are trying to pictorialize and use graphs to represent relationships in the search that they pull up. And there are a couple of other observations that I came across. One is whether it's Ross or whether it's Riedl or eBrevia or any of these other companies, all of this seems to be very much in its infancy, and one of the reasons why we thought this would be a really good topic for this particular Kali convention, because there is just so much uncertainty about where it's all going, and I think that even the databases that are being used by these different groups like Ross, there is a valid question, well, how extensive are these? What if that particular database that's being used by Ross doesn't have that one case that is actually critical and could have made a difference in the situation? So I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's good to figure it all out. Yeah. Well, let's start off with the.
Yes, I see another hand here.
There was two. I start in the back there with.
I include expert systems in artificial intelligence. I think you might have to ask the question, is it smart because it was programmed well and it has a good set of rules versus something that's going out and is kind of trying to derive its own kind of understanding of the system. So the current state is that there's more emphasis on learning systems right now, but I don't think that, to me, I use a very broad definition of intelligence, right? I would not exclude that. Maybe other people will.
If I may interject, at least in my opinion, I feel like there are different degrees of intelligence. So I would feel like a learning system would be more intelligent in some ways, but that's not to say that the expert system isn't intelligent. It's probably less intelligent. So
it's complicated, right? So an expert system that has a really good set of rules that comes from a set of experts who design the rules is going to be really good, and it's going to be very precise and make fewer mistakes on the things that it's been programmed to do, yet less capable of dealing with unusual circumstances because it hasn't seen new documents, new things come in. Learners are going to be more unreliable because it's trying to learn everything that we could sit down and hard code in. But it's going to be able to adapt as the situation changes, as more documents. You're going to have this trade-off of noisy, messy uncertainty, yet capable of growing, versus static, still really good at its job, but unable to adapt and change. And you kind of don't have this in between right now. And so, yeah, I want to go back to some of these points about automation. So I do think that, so first of all, if you see things that are products, understand that companies are not obliged to do studies to prove that their systems work. They are salespeople.
In answer to this question over here.
Into that, right? Yeah. So law schools, and so in artificial intelligence research, we are academicians. We don't have the Hippocratic oath, but we do have an obligation to prove that our systems do what we say they do. So understand where these messages are coming from, first of all. Second of all, I think, things are going to change. Certain things like tickets, traffic tickets are going to be more automatable. And my sense is those are the things that people don't want to do as much, and they'd rather be looking for these nuggets that change the case law. Changing case law, new case law, is by definition outside the pattern of the previous. Right, and that is, Mikhail's working on creative systems, but that is 10 years plus. That is 10 more Mikhails getting PhDs before we even have a clue on how to do those sorts of things. And my sense is that's where the action and excitement and they're even small things, right? How do you communicate through briefs, which require these creative little touches? And so you guys have really hard jobs. I see things that are automatable, but But if you look at those 6 things that you have to do, right, it's kind of like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The ones at the top are not as interesting, right? And hopefully most of you agree with me. Hopefully I'm not getting myself into trouble here. Those are the ones that are going to get knocked off first.
Well, they're being done by clerks anyway.
Right, and as you go further and further down those things, there's an exponential curve where everything is exponentially harder.
So we are running out of time. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, so I want to take this back to the classroom, because what I heard you saying,
hire someone, or when you create an artificial intelligence to do it, you tell it what to do, but can you remember every time? What can we take from this to help teach our students how to make these inferences, which is what you're talking about, social convention or others? We're trying to teach people to draw inferences within the boundaries of law.
Right.
Is there something from your program that we can now use in our classroom?
I'm just gonna have to say I don't know enough to say for sure. There are gonna be tools, and the right tools in the right places in the job they're gonna augment memory, right? Help us remember things. They're gonna find documents faster, and maybe they're gonna sort the things that are more relevant up there, but they're gonna miss things, right? So I do see. I think the only thing I can say is that over time we will see augmentation, which I hope shifts people from certain types of tasks to other types of tasks. But
teaching them how
in
to
teaching,
do it.
right?
I don't know
Okay.
about other people out there, but I actually have to teach my law students how to make legal inferences as opposed
Right.
to
Uh-huh.
lay notions.
Right. So in educational systems, I can tell you there are AI researchers that do focus on educational systems. They're called intelligent tutoring systems. The best tutoring systems are in physics and math, where there are well-defined rules, and you just have to remember, you have to learn how to multiply, right? Or how to use F equals MA, right? And that equation never changes. You just have to learn when to apply it. We can help with those things along. There's still a lot of things that you learn in school that are unstructured, ill-formed. That's where case studies come in, where those are practice environments. Here's a hypothetical situation. We don't necessarily even know what the right answer is. You need to practice thinking through and drawing these inferences and remembering things that might be appropriate or not. Tell me if I'm out of line here as to how these things work. Computers can set up those situations, and what's nice is they don't even have to know what the right answer is. They just have to force you to practice the skills. I think they can have value there.
Okay, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I want to thank Lloyd, my co-presenter, Mark, Mikhail, and Heidi. Thank you so very much for coming in remotely, and thank you all for attending. I'm glad you got. I'm sorry you didn't get to show your.
Can we see your video now?
Yeah, we could show. Why not?
Sure.
Sure, why not?
If anyone wants to stay to see Mark's video, we'll run it right
Yeah,
now.
we're going to
Some
show
of
Mark's
you are
video
not
for those who
hungry,
want to
some of you are on
watch.
diets.
It's actually just a little stick figure walking on a grid. It's very, very, very uninteresting.
You're talking about creating enough case studies to
Right.
teach the computer, and computers can do many more case studies at once. It's possible.
Well, is that fun or what?
So, that was great. That was very good. It's good to see you, too.
Right. Thank you. Right.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you. I'm sorry, tell me your name. Rich Brad.
Get lunch and set up for
Yeah, okay, you go next, huh? All right, good luck.
Thank you, though.
Let's go. So, I'll put this.
3 dozen?
Say it again?
We had about three.
We had
I say how many in the room?
we'll count the chairs. We had a full house, so we'll count the chairs. And,
Is this audio up?
I don't think there's audio on this. Well, hang on, what's happening? Audio seems to have.
They may shut it up.
Oh, that could be what it is.
I don't know what happened to our audio. Let's see if I can.
I think. I think we lost audio. I think they shut. It automatically kills the audio.
Yeah, I think the time. I think it's time. So.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. The audio is already off, I believe. This one is still on. It's weird. Pleasure. Thanks a lot.
that could have been economic. It's awesome that we watch them come to I find this fascinating. You know, you were talking, I heard about you described agency. I tell you to go and pick up for me my teacher, but did I have to tell you to pay for it to Right, and let me tell you how far the state of the art is from when I was in college in the early 80s, dealing with people who were doing the first level of AI, you know, the 80s level of AI, you know, people who've gone on to, you know, do yeah, you know, my friends all work with AI.
Well, we had, yeah, just for some reason the audio, we just, I know.
I had that with a bunch of computer science people who are sweet, they're doing stuff with it. So, yeah, that's why I have just enough knowledge.
It's odd, it's on my machine. And I haven't made any changes other than... weirdest thing. I have full volume on there.
And when is it similar enough and when is it different enough?
You can go to your settings.
Law developers, they know standard rules because judges do their own assumptions.
System preferences?
Ex-judge,
You mean sound?
in a particular judge, who had to go cross-judge, had conflicting decisions.
It's Crestron. Okay. So I could just...
How recent did that do that the entire time?
No. We actually had terrific. Everything worked really well right up until and it was obviously it was over after the time slot. But we still had people in some. Oh, thank you. Oh, so you were able to monitor. Wow. Everything worked really well. Thank you, man. You nailed it.
I appreciate it.
No, really.
I'm going to log you out.
Sure.
If you
Yeah.
just, if you could, you don't this is one of the experts.
Right. Oh, actually, well,
Send me
yeah.
did you send me the
Oh yeah. I could give you access to the Prezi if that is helpful.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I can go through it.
Right.
Because I think I can use it everything.
Right.
I went off to law school and for BDN. You used it at ARPANET.
And the videos, a couple of the videos we were running separately, but actually they're embedded in there too. So yeah. Terrific. You're the master, eh? Really? No. Well,
Reading.
You know, like, this is just getting things to go smoothly was huge help. Really, I mean, just great. Everyone, we had a full house. I mean, it's very hard.
You filled up our ass. I'm not kidding. 247.
Are you serious? So we had a
They were using an Xbox controller. Yeah, you're the only class that has done that.
Using markers. But you know, again, you guys helped us pull it off. Without that,
it's good enough.
Yeah.
And so I guess at this point,
I'm not
the
gonna leave it on.
freedom to not have markers on.
Yeah, it's going to be confusing when they start
Noise you have in
recording.
your signal from the PC.
Or do you want me to just leave it on?
But yeah, the general idea there is that we've actually tried to use case-based reasoning. So try to figure out what you've seen in the past that's relevant to the current situation.
Right.
Pick out the parts of the relevant things that you want to use in your current problem, and then synthesize that together to get a solution. So it's inspired by things like legal reasoning, but it's very different.
Right.
Specific.
What made you think of using going into dance as the?
So actually this came out of some previous work about improvisation in theater. So in college I was in theater and music, and I came here.
So where'd you go for that?
you do, yeah. You know, some guy in Untitled Chapter. Oh, now that's a robotic question. I think we are not sure about the robots here.
Well, no, he wasn't Georgia Tech. He was at NYU, and then he went to he was in,
you think so?
in London, and then he spent some time back in.
Unlikely.
Okay.
Did a lot of us.
Right.
So then I came here and then joined Tech. There was professors doing interesting work, creativity and intelligence. So I guess we have a good fit. Yeah, dance came out of the improv work. So improv theater needed a lot of hand-coded knowledge. So the idea was try to begin with a domain that's a little simpler in terms of the meaning and the structured stuff.
Right.
So try to learn it from watching people. So that's why we chose it.
That's very nice, very nice. Yeah, in a past life, I did like I stage managed community theater, so.
Cool.
But it's probably almost the exact opposite of improvised. You got to make sure you get it right at the same time.
Same way every time. I did that